Hello and welcome to the South Pacific Alliance podcast, and thank you so much for joining us this week, this month. I'm so excited for today, but before I introduce our guests, I just want to say thank you so much to our churches and supporters who gave through District Fair Share. Your support allows things like this podcast, like church plants, like winter camp that we're having tomorrow as of this recording, to be possible. And we don't have to find some kind of sponsor for our podcast. We can just be here to share the love and wisdom of God and encourage and support you in your ministry. Today, we're going to be talking about sustainable ministry and restorative practices. And I have two fantastic guests and friends with me today, in Gary and Joy Tangeman. Hello, welcome.
Hello. Hi, Michael.
Thank you for having us here.
Of course. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for this. When I first dreamed of the podcast last summer, you were at the top of my list to have on here and to talk about this, because this, I think, is so this topic is so important for our pastors and our ministry workers, because especially after the past few years, there's so many people are burned out. So many pastors have left ministry. And there's so many that are on the edge of leaving ministry, whether from retirement or from burnout, that these are essential things to find longevity in ministry. So before we get to that topic, I would love to just have you share about yourselves. Who are you? What's your history in ministry? And what are you doing now?
Okay, great. Well, Joy and I have been together in ministry for quite a few years. We've been married for 44 years, and I've been in ministry almost, it'll be 47 years. And so we've had an opportunity to serve in a number of churches, both in and outside the Alliance. But we are now currently serving at Celebration Church in Santa Ana. And we've been there about 8.5 years now. And so Joy has been our office manager, and I've been the lead pastor of a multi-ethnic congregation that we have been pastoring for during this time.
Well, we lived in Washington for about 16 years with the Christian Missionary Alliance Church up there in Washington, and we moved down, and we've been here about 8.5 years. And we're so thankful. We've been able to be closer to our adult daughters and their families, and have been able to welcome 4 grandchildren into our life. And so that has been so much fun. We have 4 under 5, so it's kind of busy when they come over. And Gary and I realize why you have children when you're younger, because it is can be tiring.
Yeah.
So
you got quite the history of ministry, and now you're solidly in your current role. And I'll just give you another pat on the back. I love what Celebration is doing. 8 different congregations, right, in 3 or 4 different languages.
Well, we're just adding a 4th language now.
A 4th language now. And 10 years ago, this building was used just once a week for 30 minutes or an hour on Sunday. And now it is so full of life. And I just want to give a shout out to you. And I just love how creative that ministry is, and the collaboration that you have with those other ministry leaders, because you have some amazing talent in leading those other congregations. You obviously don't speak the other languages.
No, English is enough for me.
But Spanish and Cambodian.
Yes, and now we'll be adding, we'll have a Chinese.
And a Chinese.
So they'll be speaking Mandarin.
It's amazing, and I love it. And I hope more of our churches embrace that kind of model, that they can just support other congregations inside their walls.
Yes.
So tell us about Standing Stone, because you are our Standing Stone representatives for our district. And tell us about what Standing Stone is and what you offer our workers.
Okay. Well, Standing Stone is a ministry for pastors and ministry leaders. And as Joy and I often like to share with people, when you go to church on a Sunday, when a typical person goes to church, the question becomes, who's the only person at church on Sunday that doesn't have a pastor? And that would be your pastor. So when pastors and ministry wives are hurting and when they're facing challenges in their ministry, who do they go to?
Yeah.
Who can they talk with? And so we come alongside pastors and ministry leaders in our district, offering a listening ear. Perhaps there's a situation that might need to be addressed and some work that needs to be done. And so we help to bring experience and perspective and resources that can help in that process.
Yeah. I'll just say that, I've had the opportunity to speak with you as someone in need, and it has been incredibly helpful to me, and not only me, but my wife as well. I think something that is often forgotten for our senior pastors and our leaders and any of our pastors or workers is the spouses. And I remember when my dad went to work at the district office in Mid-America many years ago. He left the local church, but my mom had to go through a grieving process because she lost her pastor. And, David didn't preach anymore. He wasn't her pastor. And there's a loss there. And so there's Joy, you bring a wonderful aspect to this where it's great to see you guys doing this ministry together, where you just have such a kind heart and a gracious word, and you're sensitive to hear from the Spirit and to speak what he says. And oftentimes that was very helpful for me and for my wife in our conversations. And so I'll just first say about Standing Stone, this is a free service to our workers. If you are listening and you are wrestling with something, please contact Gary and Joy. And we'll have their information in the video and the links in the description, and we'll have you share at the end as well. But they are here for you. And because of churches that support us through District Fair Share, they are free to you and they are confidential to you. They don't come talking to us at the district office. They are 100% for our workers. And I love that we have that opportunity because ministry is lonely.
Yes.
So let's just start with, where do we even begin on this topic of sustainable ministry? I mean, let's even start with this sustainable ministry. I've come to this understanding, I was kind of taught this last year, and you can agree or disagree with this, that balance in life is not really possible because you work for 8 hours a day and then you can't relax for 8 hours a day. Like it's not like a scale, and that's not even particularly biblical because Jesus was all in, but he had sustainable ministry. He had rhythms that would inspire him and encourage him and refresh him. So I like to use the term sustainable ministry because I think it helps people feel more okay with how they're living when they don't get a full 4 hours of relaxation in the evening because they have chores or work to do. But on the weekend, they find those practices that refresh them and restore them. So would you agree with the concepts of sustainable ministry versus a balance in ministry?
I think we would. We know it's not possible time-wise to evenly balance everything.
Right.
But what we're interested in is trying to pursue those things that will enable us to stay fresh in ministry and really in tune with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think our world, and I for many years had bought into this too, that we would oftentimes judge our effectiveness in ministry by how much we do, how efficient we can become. And while we may accomplish a great deal in the scope of a day, oftentimes in the midst of that busyness, it's easy to lose touch with Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, we might start well. We might have a great quiet time and spend time in the Word and in prayer. But, we sort of put that aside, and now we get on with the rest of the day. And sometimes we'd go through the day, and even though we started well, I wouldn't be thinking about Jesus at all.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about my responsibilities and study, people I need to meet with, leadership, all those kinds of things would come into play. And so what we're trying to do, and we talk about sustainable ministry, is to say, how can we be more mindful and in touch and in tune with the Lord all the way through the day?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love what you said about rhythms. I think we all are striving for the balance, but that's a really good point that you made in the beginning, that can we really find balance?
Yeah.
Because as usually we find that ministry leaders, pastors' wives, staff members, that they are often really busy.
Yes.
And they are often driven and type A personalities. And so they get a lot done. They get a lot done for the Lord, which is wonderful. But they often need permission to just pause, whatever that looks like. And so Gary and I have kind of a neat time helping them to, take a day off, take a date night, to pull away and just a Sabbath, making sure they have a day off. Because a lot of times pastors don't have a day off. And they think the more they do, they almost feel guilty in having a day off. So that's something that we've learned. And recently we were able to take a sabbatical, which was very transforming for us at this stage of life, to take a break. And then you can see sometimes where areas you might have overdone it, or you're and leaving the Lord out of your life in many ways, because we all try to do work for Him, but sometimes we forget to include Him.
Absolutely, yes. One of the phrases I would like to use with my volunteers back in youth ministry days is that what you do matters, but who you are matters more. And you need to be investing in themselves and continuing, because if they're investing themselves, they don't have anything to give. And what we do as pastors in ministry is always, it feels so important, and it is so important.
It is important.
But who we are matters, and how we're living that out matters. If we're asking other people to live a healthy lifestyle spiritually and physically, emotionally, in all these ways, we needed to be doing it ourselves too.
Yes.
So you mentioned you went on a sabbatical recently, and I'd love to have the question, what is a sabbatical? How is it different than a rhythm of Sabbath? And what did you guys do for your sabbatical? And how was it restorative for you?
Well, a sabbatical is an extended time away from our normal ministry responsibilities. And in our case, Joy and I, this is the second time that we've done this. We were able to take 3 months where our church blessed us and was able to say, we'll cover everything, and you guys just need to be off. And so we didn't have any responsibilities. We didn't go to our church on Sunday. We went to other churches. That was very refreshing. And for us, it was a time away from the busyness, the schedule, and the routine. So when you take time off like that on a sabbatical, your pace of life changes greatly. And when you don't have the normal schedule that on certain days we know we're going to be doing certain things, when you don't have that, it's quite different. And so we discovered that we had more time for reflection. We also found out that we got to play together. And so many times when we're in ministry, life gets so busy, we don't get to play as much as we'd like. So we had more time to play. I had time to read, to do some more reading, and we had a chance to get more in touch with each other as a couple, where sometimes we lose some of that when we're in the busyness of ministry.
And sometimes, as a couple, we can separate when we're in ministry. The wife might be working, the husband is, at church, and we often kind of go different paths. And so it was just really refreshing to both be on the same path together, and we both found things that we enjoyed. We got together with friends. We spent a lot of time with our family. Actually, got to attend church with our adult children and our grandchildren, which was really fun. And and then just doing errands, just doing the everyday life things. We got to do that together. Not everything, but just most of it. So it was just really enjoyable.
You shared, there's some pastors who don't even take a day off.
Right.
3 months might sound insane to some of our pastors, some of our listeners. So what would you say to those pastors who maybe have never taken more than a 2-week vacation in all of their time in ministry?
Well, we don't realize how sadly we are in need of rest. We get used to the busyness, but our soul often withers in the midst of that. And our relationship with those who are most important to us, either our family, our spouse, oftentimes that gets put on the shelf to some extent, to some degree, and we don't have the time to cultivate and enjoy those relationships. And so oftentimes being able to take some time away gives a chance for those areas of our life that aren't often addressed to begin to become revisited once again. And one of the things that we are so happy about is now that we experienced a sabbatical when it was in the fall, so we were off October, November, and December, and now we have another pastor and his wife on our staff that just began their sabbatical on Monday.
Wonderful.
And so they're going to take some extended time away, and they have been in ministry for 16 or 17 years. And I asked our pastor, I said, how long have you been away from the ministry at any particular time? Well, in all those years, they'd never been away for more than 1 week at a time.
Wow.
In 16 years. And so they were really ready for one solid time where they could be away and not have the schedule of ministry. And so we're praying for them that they will be blessed as we were, and we're setting that up as the standard in our church, that if you've been with us on staff and you've been here for at least 7 years or more, it's time for you to have a sabbatical, some extended time away.
I think it really has made a difference. And then modeling that for our staff. And it wasn't easy for me because I'm kind of involved in the workings of the office at this stage of my life. And so Gary kind of took it easier than I did. He jumped right in and enjoyed the time off. And I was still feeling a little pull of what's going on. I need to be involved. I need to oversee this or that. And so, it took me a few weeks to kind of disengage.
Yeah.
And Michael, I think you don't understand how much you need a period of rest like this until you get into a sabbatical and then find out how many weeks does it take you to relax.
Yeah.
So we discovered it was a good 3 weeks into the sabbatical before we could feel like, okay, now we're not thinking about what we should be doing on this particular day. We broke the routine, and then we started to relax. But that was a sign to us of how much we needed this because how long it took for us to really settle in to be able to relax.
Well, I often hear that. I hear that from a lot of pastors say like, oh, well, I have to take 2 weeks because it takes me a week to start to relax.
It really does.
I even heard it described as unspooling. It takes me a week to unspool, and then it take a couple of days at the end of it to start spooling back up. And I even have this picture in my mind of a spring, in the sense of like, with the pressures of ministry, we get compressed, and that's a shape that the spring can be in, but it's not its natural space, and we need to allow the ebbs and flows of life to release that tension from time to time. And sometimes it takes a lot longer to release that tension.
Yes.
Even those major springs in a car are dangerous if you just try to snap them out. They have so much pressure and force on them that it's dangerous to try to do it in a short amount of time. And I think that's true for us in ministry too. There's lots of pressures on us, and we feel the weight of the gospel every day, and the weight of the kingdom of God every day, and that's good. But it's in my mind, it's a short-sighted goal to say, well, if I do this right now, I'll get this, and this done. But how long are you going to be able to do that? And it's a taking it from a bigger and broader perspective, investing and learning these types of restorative practices are allowing you to have longevity in ministry. So let me ask you this. What are the signs? What should our workers be looking out for in their own heart or their own life or their own ministry that might indicate they need to reflect on the practices that they have, or look into having a sabbatical, or finding new restorative practices for their life?
Right.
Well, I think certainly one would be a lack of joy.
Yeah.
Sometimes our joy dissipates. It is eroded away just by the constant demands of the ministry schedule. So that's one. Another one is just energy level, not necessarily having the energy to do what we know we would like to be able to do. And I think another sign is we get a little bit too serious. We can become pessimistic. We might find ourselves easily discouraged.
Or
and we
irritable.
find or irritable.
Sometimes I think
irritable, impatient.
We get impatient with the little things that normally wouldn't have bothered us. Might even be with another staff member, or things around the church, or just things that aren't going well. You find yourself snapping a little bit.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
Even as you describe those, it just sounds like you're lacking the fruit of the Spirit.
Yes.
There's no
Time
love
with
or
him,
joy
you
or
know?
peace or patience or kindness or goodness, gentleness
Yeah.
or love or self-control.
kind
Even think about 1 Corinthians 13. Love is not easily irritable, and those things. Like that's literally the opposite of what we want and
What
want to
we
be
want.
living.
Yeah.
Could I add this too?
Yeah.
That I think might be important is we might find ourselves needing a sabbatical if we notice we're becoming disconnected from our feelings. We become ministry machines.
Yeah.
We become efficient at doing what we need to do. But sometimes in doing that, we lose ourself. We lose who we are, what we're feeling, and we're not in touch with our emotions. And so we can become rather mechanical.
Yeah.
And another part of that is we enter into maybe spiritual dryness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know for me, in times that I was not smart with my restorative practices, I would just have a lack of care or empathy. People would share stuff, and
It's
I just
true.
did not care.
Yeah.
I did not care. And they need to figure their stuff out
Yeah.
and get better because Jesus is going to help them. So just let Jesus help you
Yeah.
figure it out, you know?
Right.
And it's just like that irritability is really creeps up. And I also agree, like you can just maybe be focused, and you have all your goals and you have your events and you have your plans and you just going through the motions, and there's no spirit of the Lord in your ministry.
Another one I was thinking is talking to people. It seems like anxiety, and I don't know if it's coming out of the pandemic or just where our society is at right now. I've just noticed an increase in anxiety.
Absolutely.
That seems to be a common thread that Gary and I hear as we talk with people, kind of low level, or for some people it's right on the surface.
Yeah.
And I think that anxiety just keeps us in a form of just worrying
Yes.
and stewing over things, and sometimes the molehills become mountains. And even just, I don't know if you find yourself dreading going to church, dreading seeing the congregation, that's a good sign that you might be on the burnout.
Absolutely. That's a huge issue. I mean, that especially Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like they are reducing their use of drugs and sex, but their anxiety and depression is going through the roof.
Yes.
And it's sad, but that's true of many people, especially after these past few years, and especially the way the news cycle rolls and all those
Right.
things. And so, yes, anxiety, I think that's huge too.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine you're a pastor and you're hearing this podcast and you're like, oh crap, like that's me. Like you're describing me. What's the next step? Like how do they start to work back towards sustainable ministry and healthy rhythms and in life? And maybe they can't afford to do a sabbatical. Maybe they're a single pastor for their church and they have to do everything. What do they do? How do we start moving in the right direction?
Well, many years ago, a question was posed to Dallas Willard. And this was by a pastor who'd been in ministry many, many years, and a very, we would consider to be, written books and so forth, and was a great speaker and had quite a ministry, quite an influence in the Christian world. And he asked Dallas Willard the question, what's one thing I could do to really help me grow spiritually? And I think it addresses the idea of not only spiritual growth, but how do we find ourselves on the track of renewal?
Yeah.
Okay. And Dallas Willard said, one thing you need to do: slow down, do less. And by that, he doesn't mean that we become lazy or we slack off.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is we try to do too much.
Yes.
I think we're often busier than Jesus ever intended us to be.
Yes.
And we have to figure out where in our schedule can we have some time to pause.
Yes.
Where can we, and I think that here's the paradigm of the whole thing that's so different, and really the paradox that's different, is that we think if we're doing a lot, we're getting a lot done. Not necessarily. We may be busy. But I have found that the when I am specifically trying to do less, what I mean by that is I'm trying to be more tuned in to Jesus, so that what I am accomplishing, if I'm listening to him, becomes more significant.
Yeah.
I may be not doing as much busy stuff, but what I am doing is more significant and more impactful
Yeah.
and more restful.
Yeah.
So I feel like the amazing thing is I'm accomplishing more, but it feels like I'm not having to work as hard.
Yeah.
And what I mean by working hard is not that I'm not putting in the time, but when I'm not striving.
Yeah. Well, I think even just in our world and in the American church that we see today, there's this unhealthy standard. You know, we look at these mega churches and these amazing pastors that have amazing ministries, and that's not the ministry that you are called to. You know, those pastors have their ministry for a reason, and God has given them the ability and skills and support that they need to do those ministries, but that's not your ministry. That shouldn't be your standard. We're called to obey what God has asked us to do individually. And I think you're right that many people add things to their plate thinking that this is what needs to happen, but it's without the Spirit and without Jesus and without prayer and without impact, because it's more going through the motions and more busyness and less Jesus.
Right.
And that's just been my banner these past few years is like, don't be distracted by what you think you need to do or what the world is telling you need to do. Look to Jesus and find out what you need to do. So start doing less. I'll also say, one of my favorite quotes from Pete Scazzaro is, you have to say no to the good for the best. And
That's good.
there's so much good things we can do. We can start food distributions. We can do homeless outreach. We can do all these things. And those are all good things. But God has called you to do specific things. And you have to say no to some of the good things to experience the best of what God has.
Yes. And I like what you said, Michael, about listening to Jesus. And earlier I mentioned that, you know, sometimes our pastors and wives and ministry workers, they just need a permission to take a pause.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been meaningful to me is the Pause app on my phone, created by John Eldredge, and he wrote the book Resilient Living. It's kind of coming out of that pandemic and just, you know, the influence that's had on us. And taking the time to kind of go from he calls it the shallows in our life, to the midlands. Shallows are more the to-dos of today, and the midlands are our values and our family and those important things. But going to the depths, the depths is our soul connection with God, and you know, learning to love Jesus more. And I personally have taken the 30-day challenge of that app. And you listen to it in the morning, in the evening, and it has been transformative in my life. And I've been able to share that with passion to some of the people that I'm working with or meeting with, and they also have found just a deepening of their relationship with Jesus, and learning to listen to Him and not be so caught up in the world and what's being thrown at us constantly.
Amen. I mean, I've thought about this verse a lot in our conversation already, but like that in particular brings me to the Psalm, be still and know that I am God.
Yes.
And you know, that Psalm talks about the world is crashing down around me, but I'm choosing to find solitude in Jesus. And we'll put a link for the Pause app in our description and have that available for you guys. But so people are decide, okay, I need to do less. Talk to me about the importance of a Sabbath, a weekly routine of pausing, of stopping. And what does the Sabbath look like? What does it mean to have a Sabbath? Does that mean just sitting on my couch all day? What is that? What's a Sabbath?
Well, a Sabbath is something that we didn't originate ourselves. God originated it in the Ten Commandments. And the Sabbath is basically the idea of changing the pace of life.
Yeah.
So we're going at a certain speed, certain tempo throughout the week. And then whatever day we need the Sabbath to be, it doesn't have to be Saturday, it doesn't have to be Sunday, but it needs to be one day of the week that we intentionally block out and we protect. And that is a day for us to slow down, to relax. When I talk to people about taking a Sabbath, I often describe it in terms of doing whatever refuels you. Okay? You might need a nap.
Yeah.
You might need to go out and walk. You might need to sit on the couch and veg and watch something on TV.
Yeah.
You know, that's okay. But the idea being, what will replenish you?
Yeah.
What will restore you? And of course, it can be some time with the Lord. It can be some time reading, but it can just be a variety of things. It may be getting out, taking a walk and exercising. It may be going for a little day trip.
Yeah.
whatever it could look, it could take a number of different forms, but the Lord doesn't want it to be a burden to us.
Right.
It should be something that is enjoyable and something that replenishes our soul.
Yeah. And I mean, we're not trying to be legalistic about it. Even as you say that, you might enjoy mowing the lawn, and your Saturday is you get to mow your lawn, and that is you're working on your house, but it's restorative to your soul because you're not thinking or planning or whatever, or maybe it's working in the garden, or maybe it is woodworking. At our Southern California gathering last fall, we had a hobby showcase, which was so fun, and everyone got to bring in their hobbies and show off their hobbies, our pastors and the licensed workers, and there was such a variety of things there. There was dog breeding, there was nail polish, there was model trains, there was Disneyland, there was puzzles, there was miniature scale buildings. Like there was so many things that are restorative for people. Like, and I love that opportunity to get a glimpse into people's lives and say, okay, this is something that refreshes you and restores you. So some people might think that some activities, oh yeah, well, I love to just watch football all day after Sunday. But maybe that's not actually restorative for them. Can you talk about how to discover actually restorative practices for our lives? Because, I mean, in particular, football might bring up some emotion for some people as they watch.
I kind of think I don't, at this stage of my life, really have a hobby, except I enjoy maybe crossword puzzles or
I'd call that a
walking or going out to coffee with friends.
Yeah.
That's really fun. But I think it's what brings you joy.
Okay.
And we're learning a lot about joy, and even the centers in the brain that, just an eye connection, that we do have a joy center in our brain that, and I find joy with my grandchildren. Just playing with them and seeing them laugh, or, just enjoying just being with them. So that brings a lot of joy for me, where Gary finds joy in a hobby. So he will, go off into the garage and create his diorama, and that brings him a lot of joy.
The joy is the goal here.
I think.
I would agree. And I think it's something that brings you a connection with the Lord. I think hiking can be really great for some people because they get to be in nature and they get to embrace the creativity of the Lord. But some people prefer the puzzle and they get to sit and use their mind in a way that is refreshing. And the Lord has blessed them with those minds. I love board games, and I love playing board games. And the ability to strategize, more co-op board games. I work with people to beat the game. So
you don't have to win.
Not competition.
We win together.
We win together.
Not individual competition.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Sadie does not like competitive board games, so that would not be very restorative for her.
No.
So we would never. We sometimes, but we would mostly never. But yeah, I agree. I think things that bring you joy. But it can be sometimes hard to reflect on the activities that you think are helpful to you. But again, it kind of comes back to pausing and saying, is this actually helpful to me, to my soul today?
Yeah. Is this building me up, or is this taking something from me?
Yeah. Or is this even just like a neutral? And I even think there is a difference between refreshing and relaxing, in the sense of like, there are things that refresh my soul, but I also love to just sit and watch football and watch TV, and especially if it's a team I don't care about. And that can be relaxing, but that's different than a refreshing activity that brings that joy, that connection to the Lord. Are there any other suggestions or ideas about things that people could consider?
Anything you think of?
Well, I was just thinking, one of my sisters, actually, she loves to go to a movie with one of her older sons, and they go get popcorn, and it's just I think it's the event. It's not necessarily what they're seeing, but that brings her joy, I think. It's just something fun out of the week, out of her work week, different. Her husband doesn't really enjoy movies too much, so she found a partner
Yeah.
who enjoys going and seeing movies.
Even that relationship opportunity, that's so restorative and refreshing,
Yes,
for sure.
yes.
And I think that brings up a good point is, are we needing time with certain people, or are we needing time alone?
Yeah.
Being able to discern
Yeah.
that can make a big difference in terms of how the Sabbath feels for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, I'm super introverted, so I'm so happy to just stay home and be in my little cocoon and play video games or journal or whatever. But Sadie is a little more extroverted, and she needs people. She needs particular people in her life sometimes to, and sometimes she doesn't even realize that. I'm like, just call your mom, just call Hannah, like, and
together.
refresh yourself. Call Joy, like. And
Love that.
that is huge for her. And so maybe there's people in your life that you need to be able to be connecting with on a regular basis to have that rhythm of sustainable ministry.
And sometimes with our schedule, when we are able to have sabbatical time or arrange for dinner or activities we do with certain people, that's very encouraging. Sometimes we just come away from that, we feel so refreshed and so invigorated just from being around those people. That's part of what helps to renew us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing I thought of is, reaching out for accountability, or reaching out to someone who you know is going to, that you feel comfortable and safe talking with. Gary and I connected on our sabbatical with a counselor that was in our past, that helped us through a rough patch in one of our ministries. And we were able to just meet with him and, now kind of sharing, well, here we are at this stage of life, going forward, what have you found? And it was just refreshing for us. We both came away with a kind of a new vision and just having someone else speak into our life. So I think finding those people that just really build into you and taking the time, sometimes it's an appointment. If it's a counselor, sometimes it's it's going to take some effort, but it's worth the effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that David has challenged us as a district to have is find a prayer partner.
Wonderful.
And having just once a week call and talk and pray together.
Yes.
And I was kind of convicted about that about a month ago, and I was like, okay, if we're asking all of our leaders to do this, I need to be doing this myself. And I have a friend who lives in Virginia, and I said, will you be my prayer partner? And he's like, absolutely, I'd be so honored. And so we've been alarm on my phone. He's on East Coast, so a little time difference, but we make it work. And so every Wednesday at 5:00, my phone goes off an alarm and we make a call. And we just are intentional, even to share about our week, to share what's struggling, and pray. And even if it's just like 5 minutes, like, hey, last week he was dog tired. He is a little 1.5-year-old, almost 2-year-old, and it was up all night the night before. And he's like, I'm about to like crash. And so like quick call, quick prayer, and in and out, we're good. But there's that connection and there's that restorative practice. And that's been huge for me. What aspects of prayer have you seen be significant or important for finding refreshment and sustainable ministry?
Well, some of that is praise and being able to, as we were driving out today, we were commenting, I know, on the mountains that had this fresh snowfall.
Yes.
And as I looked at the mountains, particularly straight east of us, I can't remember a time when I've ever seen those mountains with more snow. And it just spoke to me of the grandeur of God.
Yes.
And I think for us to be able to give God praise and to enjoy what He's created is very restorative. It's very refreshing because it's taking time away from the normal routine of everything we do and saying, who's behind all this?
Yeah.
And so being able to, part of prayer to me is praise.
Yeah.
And that means a lot. But another part of prayer that we don't often think of prayer is how much time do we spend listening?
Yeah.
Are we listening to the Lord, or are we doing all the talking all the time?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more that the Lord has to share with us than we often recognize. And I'll give you a good example of this. Perhaps our listeners, and many of us will have experienced this as well. We've read through the Gospel of John, and one thing you tend to see in the Gospel of John, and this is repeated 47 times in the Gospel of John, you'll see statements such as, I speak the words that the Father gave me to speak. I don't do anything but what the Father shows me what to do. Yeah. Well, most people have come across that and say, well, what, yeah, sure, he was God and God was showing him and da-da-da. But what Jesus is modeling there is how he wants us to learn to do ministry. Yeah. That part of prayer is listening. And the fact that those kind of statements are found in the Gospel of John 47 times, Jesus is modeling for us how in tune he was with the Father. Yeah. And so we need to be more in touch and in tune with Jesus all throughout the day so that we're listening to him and allowing him to set and create our agenda. Yes. And our schedules.
Absolutely. You need a pause in your pausing. Yes. keep pausing so you can continue to rest in the presence of God. I always would tell my students almost every week, I would rope it into my lesson whenever I could, like, you'll live a great life if you can answer 2 questions every day. What is God saying to you? And what are you going to do about it?
Great.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you have to pause and you have to listen. And even, as you're sharing about John, it helps me see just like how important it was for Jesus to find those times away. Because we also see that often. Jesus slipped away from the crowd. Jesus was up early in the morning, spending time by himself. When do you think God would say those things to Jesus except when he was by himself listening?
Yes.
So I think that's huge. What are the aspects of prayer do you feel like are important to this process of sustainable ministry?
Well, one of the things I learned early on from the navigators was taking a half day of prayer, which would maybe be 4 hours, and it's not something. It's something I hope to do more, but in the past, recently, I had taken a half day, and I just carved out on my calendar, this is going to be just me and the Lord. And I went to a beautiful setting. For me, it was on our patio. I can look out and see trees and our bird feeder. And I had something particular on my heart, and I was able to just didn't get up. I just had my coffee and hymn books and spent some time worshiping and praying and just asking the Lord to heal that part of my heart that was aching, and I wasn't bouncing back. Yeah. And it was just wonderful. It was such a good reminder that this is a good discipline, that half day of prayer. And I had wanted to get that into our schedule a little bit more. So it's something for me, just reflecting on that this morning, to work on.
That's great.
So, the other thing is mini prayers. Sometimes just driving in the car or going out for a walk, I might say, just repeat Jesus' name, Jesus, Jesus. And it's just like all heaven and earth stops for that moment, because, he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And I'm inviting him into my thoughts and in my walk, and just saying, Jesus, I love you. Just really dwelling on that. What does that mean? What has he done for us that we are in love with him?
Yeah.
And I think part of prayer as well is it's a time when I need to surrender.
Yeah.
I need to surrender continually, all the time. And the stronger personality we have, and if we have some type A personalities that might listen to this, we know how strong our will can be in setting our schedule and our agenda, and the energy we put into accomplishing things. Yeah. And some of that energy is good, but some of it can become more self-will, exerting itself. And I find that just the opposite is what I'm needing to do, is constantly surrender. So one of the things that I pray every day is something called the apprentice prayer, where I need to say, Jesus, I surrender everything and everybody to you. And that's part of what's in that praise app too, is John Eldridge trying to help us develop that spiritual discipline of surrendering our schedule, surrendering what I think I need to do today to the Lord, but surrendering our burdens and giving those to the Lord as well.
Absolutely. And even in ministry, I think we do put that pressure on ourselves for particular outcomes. And I learned very quickly in ministry that if I wanted to find joy in the things I was doing, I had to release the outcome back to the Lord and say, Lord, whatever you want to do for this pizza night, this movie night, this lock-in, whatever it was, great. And I need to be okay if one kid shows up. That's okay, because the Lord is entrusting me with that one kid to care for them. If 20 kids show up, if 30 more than I expected show up, great. And let's have a great time and worship the Lord together through that. But not having those expectations really released me in my planning and in my experiences of ministry to not be upset with myself for, wow, why didn't I get more kids there? Why didn't more people show up? Or why didn't we raise more money, or whatever it is? The Lord has a plan. And all of these disciplines that we put in our lives, I think, help us have the faith to trust in the Lord through all of the ups and downs. It's not easy to take half a day to pray. It's not easy to choose to fast for 3 days and just surrender back to the Lord through that practice, that discipline. But those disciplines allow us to trust in the Lord. That's the goal. You're not like trying to like the pagans. I think of pagans that were at the Elijah when they were trying to bring fire from heaven. They're cutting themselves, trying to earn the favor of their God. That's not what we're doing with these disciplines. We are aligning ourselves with the Lord. And I think that's the biggest key to me in sustainable ministry, is being in line with the Lord, because that's how we see Jesus do all of the things that he did.
Yes. And I think another way that we can help ourselves be more tuned in to the Lord is to think of what are we doing with our minds during the day. And so I've tried, one of the little disciplines that I've been trying to develop is whenever I'm in the car by myself, I used to love to listen to music. I do not listen to music. I take that time for that to be my prayer closet. And so I'm doing either one of two things. I'm praying and talking to the Lord, or the other thing I'm doing is I'm using my mind during that time in the car to purposely focus on a phrase. And there's a little book that was written many years ago called The Way of a Pilgrim. And The Way of a Pilgrim is a story of a man in Russia who was a monk and traveling from village to village. And he met someone who talked to him about how do we become more mindful of the Lord in our life. And the prayer is a simple prayer, is, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And I find myself repeating that in my mind. When I'm not praying and I'm in the car, I'm repeating that to the Lord in my mind, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And it's amazing if we did that several hundred times a day, how we can actually begin to train our brain to have as our default going right back to Jesus. So when I'm on the elliptical machine and I'm doing some cardio exercise and I'm at the gym, I might listen to music then, but at the same time, I'm also saying, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I will just say that, and I might be doing cardio workout for 30 to 40 minutes, and I'm saying that in my brain over and over and over, because I want to train my brain when it's free to go right back to Jesus.
Absolutely. It sounds like Paul is a really good trainer. So you can just take some verses with you to the gym and find some inspiration. So I just get the sense that I'm sure there's someone listening to this and they're still saying, I get it, I hear you, I just can't. Right now in ministry, there's too much to do. And even personally, I feel that right now. I'm on the brink of winter camp, 2 weekends in a row, and there's been a lot. So what would you say to those people who are in very busy and difficult seasons, who are fulfilling the things that Jesus has called to them?
That's a good question.
Yes.
Michael, the first thing that came to me is turning on praise worship music. You know, if that's filling your home and while you're packing for camp or, you know, whatever you're doing, you're hearing worship music that sometimes it will just, you know, touch your heart just for a few moments, and we don't even realize it, but you find yourself singing along with it. So for me, just having, you know, either a Christian radio playing where I'm hearing godly words and godly teaching, or if I'm hearing worship music, that tends to just help me to refocus, even though I have other things that I'm working on right then.
Yeah. Don't abandon it, right?
Yeah, it just keeps a peace in the home and kind of a spirit sweetness that keeps me realizing there's more important than just my to-dos.
Yes. Amen.
And I think another part is like we were just talking about a moment ago, is what are we doing about those empty times when we are driving in the car, we're going out for a walk? What are we doing with our mind?
Yeah.
What are we allowing our mind to think about? Are we intentionally focusing our mind on the Lord?
Yeah.
And what will allow us to worship Him and be more in touch with Him? Or are we just thinking about all the stuff we got to do?
Yeah.
And we can be more purposeful about the downtime when we're not able to necessarily do something. But we can. We can actually be training our mind to go to Jesus.
Yeah. There's space. I think what I hear you guys saying is there is space, even in the busyness, to bring Jesus in.
Yes.
You know, instead of listening to that podcast on your drive, pray. When you're packing, put the worship on. There's space when you're prepping dinner.
Absolutely.
Don't throw a TV show on. Throw on worship music or an encouraging podcast or something. I think there are ways to bring Jesus in and keep focused on there. And even those small things, even if it's 5 minutes, can be restorative and part of that practice. I imagine that sometimes the rhythms of ministry have big waves and sometimes it's small waves. Sometimes it's your normal weekly rhythm and that's great, but sometimes there's a big wave that comes up.
Like retreat.
Like a retreat, like winter camp coming up, like whatever it is, like district conference for us, like our Better Together gathering in September for us. That's going to be a busy month. That's going to be a big wave. But the other side of a wave, it crashes, and it's a big crash, and it's a bigger lull. And I think that's part of the key there is if you have a big season of busyness, you need to have a proportionate downtime to restore your soul and find space.
Yes.
And maybe planning that and looking forward to it. So we can get through this weekend. We can get through the next week because we have a really busy week. But we know that on Saturday we're going to, do something, go to breakfast or go to Disneyland or whatever restores your joy and restores you. Just to plan a few days to like downside.
Absolutely. So I know there's many of our listeners, hopefully many people are listening to this and taking so much away from this. What else? Is there anything else that we need to talk about or mention to help our pastors discover sustainable ministry if they're not living in it?
Well, I found it's helpful to understand there's what's called a three-legged stool of spiritual transformation. And really what all this is about is forming us into the very image of Jesus. Romans chapter 8, that all things are heading in that direction. And that's what God is working on, shaping us into the very image of Jesus. And again, Dallas Willard, I thought was helpful in this, is he mentions three things that are imperative in the process of spiritual transformation. How do we become more like Jesus? And one of the legs of the stool, I'll mention the three of them. The first leg is beginning to look at life and all the events of life that we're going through as not crises, not interruptions, not obstacles, but lessons to grow from.
Amen. So
looking at life as God's school, God's classroom for training me.
Yes.
That's very important. We often think, it's my spiritual time at church, or it's the spiritual time in my quiet time.
Yeah.
No. All of my 24-hour, 7-day-a-week existence is all God's school for training me. So when bad things happen, when difficult things happen, that's all part of how am I going to learn and experience Jesus in the midst of these challenges.
Yes.
So that's the first leg of the stool.
Amen.
Okay, learn from everyday events.
Yes.
Okay. Second one is to enthrall our mind with Jesus. In other words, to become a student of Jesus, to really study and spend time in the Gospels to see how did he live, how did he do life, how did he do ministry. And that's really an important one, because once you begin to look at the Gospels and say, Jesus, how can I learn from you about how to live life and do life? All of a sudden, his life becomes the template for how we learn all of this.
Yeah.
Like how often are we tuned into the Father, like he says he was in John, Gospel of John.
Yeah.
And that's the second leg of the stool is to do everything we can to learn from Jesus about life and ministry. And then the third leg of the stool, which is very helpful, is to practice the spiritual disciplines.
Yeah.
And certain ones are going to be more helpful to us than others. Gary Thomas has written a book describing the 9 different spiritual temperaments. Well, just like we have different personalities, we have different spiritual temperaments. And there are certain spiritual disciplines that will be more meaningful to certain temperaments than others will be.
Yeah.
And so that book is a great read, because there's a little quiz and a way to kind of look and say, well, where do I see, what are my spiritual temperaments, and what would be the most helpful spiritual disciplines in light of who I am and how God has wired me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Jesus was a rabbi, a teacher for a reason. And we often, just as you were describing that, that's what stood out to me. We often talk about Jesus as Lord, Savior, Sanctifier, Healer, Friend, but he's a teacher too. And I love that picture. And that's what the original disciples did. They followed him so that they could learn how to live like him, how to do ministry like him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the picture that really has helped me is the answer to this question. When we think about Jesus, what are the words that come to our mind? Well, holy, joyful, fruitful, wise, all these things. But there's one picture of him that we often don't think about when we think about Jesus and how we see him in the Gospels. And here's the word that has stood out to me. Jesus was unhurried.
Yeah.
And an unhurried life is not a lazy life.
Right.
An unhurried life is the most productive and the most fruitful, because an unhurried life is one, as Jesus modeled it, that is so tuned into the Father that we are doing the most important things instead of just the busy things.
Right. Absolutely. Wonderful.
I really like that. And I think 2 things came to my mind was, sometimes the night before, just on a Post-it or something, write down the most important things you have to do the next day. That's very, I'm kind of a practical person.
Yeah, that's good.
But I just getting, keeping those in place. It's the 5 top things that you need to do. And then, let life happen around that.
Sure.
But, maybe it's time with the Lord. Maybe it's, interactions with your family and such and such.
Yeah.
And the other thing I thought of, as over the 44 years that Gary and I have been married, is I think we've remained teachable. I've met some friends whose husbands are pastors, and they're just really not teachable. They have gotten hardened in their spirit, and I feel like Gary and I have both stayed teachable. We want to learn.
Yeah.
We're open to read something new, or to learn about something, or to look at life a different way. So I hope that we can do that, till we get to go to heaven. But I think remaining teachable and not thinking that we have all the answers.
Yeah.
Not thinking that, the way I've done it is always the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Being open to change, being open to embracing the Lord in it. Because in every season of life, it's like he takes us through a new set of, just a new set of things to learn. And so it's great to be flexible and to be open and teachable to what the Lord's going to do, and what method he may use. He may use a counselor one season.
Sure.
He may use a book another season. He may use your journaling in a season of life. So I think be open to what is meaningful to you in that season.
Absolutely. I'm reminded, there's a handful of miracles that Jesus does multiple times, healing blindness or making lame walk, but he never does it the same way.
No.
And if we are patiently waiting for God to do it the way we thought he would do it,
Sure.
we're going to miss where he's going and where he's leading. And so I really appreciate you mentioning humility in this process. It even takes humility to say, I need to pause. I need to be restored. And sometimes we can get so caught up in the success, the worldly success of our ministries, that we don't take the time to humble ourselves and say, okay, I need to refresh. I need to restore. I need to find this sustain. If I want to keep this going, if you want to keep this going, you need to find sustainable ministry. I'll say that to you, not from you. If you are listening and God is doing great things, discover sustainable ministry if you want God to continue doing great things. Something David would always impress upon our elder board back in the day is God's not going to bless a sinful lifestyle. And if you are crushed with busyness, that is a sinful lifestyle. That is a hurried lifestyle. That is not like how Jesus wants you to live. So if you want to see success in your ministry, this is essential to discover and understand, because God's not going to bless busyness. He's not going to bless things that are not of him. There's lots of good you can do. I cannot say that enough. Like you can be filling your schedule with so many good things, but if it's not of Jesus, what's the point? And that's what I always come back to when I think about this topic and I have these conversations with people is what you do matters, but who you are matters more. That's who Jesus wants to love you and love people through you. But you have to be loved by Jesus for him to love through you.
Yes, that's right.
And we were created for communion with him.
Amen.
And I think sometimes we forget that through the Old Testament, he's building the tabernacle. That's very important to God, and all of the details that went into that. And now here he is. The tabernacle is in our heart. So he wants to have residence with us. Jesus Emmanuel. He came to be with us. So I think we need to remember, that he is. He wants relationship with us as well. So
he did a lot of work to be able to have relationship with us.
He
paid a high price to have relationship with
us.
So let's invest in that relationship. Spend time in that relationship while you do the good things that he's prepared for you. There's so many verses rolling in my head right now. The story of Mary and Martha. I think of Ephesians 2, the good works that were laid out before you, like to walk in them. But we have to follow Jesus in those pieces. And so so much. I think we could talk for another hour, but I won't keep you here for another hour because people can come talk to you on their own.
Oh, we love that.
So how can people get in touch with you?
Well, we either an email or phone call, either one. And sometimes we're spread out in our district, so we may not always be able to get together, but we can certainly Zoom.
Yes.
And we found that's been a great tool coming out of the pandemic, that we've had a lot of our appointments with our Standing Stone care for shepherds has been through Zoom. And so, sometimes it's the most convenient way to do it because we don't have to fight through traffic and we can get together and talk and pray. And it's not as good as maybe in person, but the Lord seems to be able to use that, certainly today.
Yes, so we'll have your contact information on screen in the description, but it's also on our website, cmaspa.org, and feel free to contact them. Again, huge thank you to our churches that support our district through District Fair Share. They make you possible to be available to them. And so you're a great resource, and I hope people get in touch. But anything else, any last thing you want to say or want to mention before we close out?
Well, I was going to say some of the appointments that we will end up having with the different ones in our district can be on a regular basis because some have contacted us and just said, I just really need to talk to you maybe once every couple of weeks, once a month. Others have approached us and said, could you be an accountability partner for me? And I said, we would love to do that. So Joy has done that with some of the ladies. I've done that with some of the men. And so our care is not limited to just someone experiencing a crisis in their life.
Right.
It can be a number of things. It can be certainly spiritual pastoral care, but there's also some coaching and mentoring that we are available to do with our district leaders as well.
Absolutely. And I'll even just share my experience where I came to you guys in a season of wrestling about transition and what was next in ministry and in life. And it was a tough season for me and for my wife. And what I appreciated most was your friendship and just your availability and your kind words to let me off the hook of my own expectations of saying like, well, why, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to stress about that. Everything's going to be okay. And sometimes that's all we need to hear. So if you need to hear that right now, please contact Gary and Joy and get to know them and let them get to know you and be a part of the family. Be a part of the family of the district and the Alliance family and the family of God. Because we're all here for each other.
Yes, that's right.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience. Thank you, our district family, for supporting us, for watching. If you found this encouraging, please share it. Send it to a pastor friend of yours, whether they're in our district family or not, because there's so many people that need to hear and experience and understand this. Because we are all for the kingdom of God above all else. And we want to see sustainable ministry in all of our workers, whether they're part of our Alliance family or not. But in the meantime, thank you again so much. Thank you, Gary and Joy. And until next time, all of Jesus for all the world.
Yes. Amen.